Welcome to our channel, English Forest. Look down at a simple cup of tea. Steam rising, a few leaves turning slowly in the water. It seems like the most peaceful thing in the world, but that quiet little cup has a secret. This humble drink has built fortunes and emptied them. It has crossed oceans in the bellies of great ships. It has crowned kings and ruined them. And one day this gentle leaf would help start a war that changed the map of the world. Hard to believe, looking at something so calm. But every cup of tea you have ever held is carrying thousands of years of human history inside it. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey. We will follow this one small leaf from a misty mountain in ancient China, across deserts and seas, into golden palaces and dark smuggling ships, all the way to the wars it caused. It is a story of beauty and greed, of art and addiction, of peace and blood, and it all began by accident. Stay with me, and as you listen, your English grows quietly too, one word at a time. How can one drink hold so much? That is the wonder of it. Tea has been a medicine and a luxury. It has been the heart of a quiet ceremony and the spark of a violent war. It has made some people unimaginably rich and left others in chains and addiction. It has been loved by emperors in golden palaces and by tired workers in cold cities. The same leaf, the very same plant, touched all of these lives in all of these different ways. And by the end of our journey tonight, you will look at your own cup, and it will never seem quite so ordinary again. Before we begin, let me give you one fact to hold in your mind. Today, tea is the most popular drink in the entire world, second only to plain water. Think about that. Out of every drink humans have ever invented, all the juices and sodas and coffees, nothing comes close to tea except water itself. Billions of cups are poured every single day in nearly every country on Earth. In the morning to wake up, in the afternoon to rest, at night to calm down. In times of joy and in times of grief, humans reach for tea. It has become so ordinary that we barely notice it. And yet, this everyday thing has one of the most extraordinary stories you will ever hear. The most common drink in the world hides one of the most uncommon histories. Let us uncover it together. Our story starts almost 5,000 years ago in ancient China. There is a legend, and like all good legends, we cannot be sure how much is true. But it is too lovely not to tell. The story goes that there was an emperor named Shen Nong. He was more than a ruler. He was a scientist, a healer, a man deeply curious about the natural world. And he had one strict rule for his people. Before you drink any water, you must boil it first. He believed boiling kept people safe from sickness. So everywhere the emperor traveled, his servants would boil water for him to drink. One day, the emperor was resting in the shade of a wild tree. His servants set a pot of water over the fire, as they always did. A soft wind moved through the branches above, and a few leaves drifted down silently and fell into the boiling pot. The water slowly turned a pale golden brown. The emperor, being curious, did not throw it away. He lifted the cup and breathed in. The smell was fresh and pleasant. He took a sip, and something wonderful happened. The drink was refreshing. It woke him up. It made his tired mind feel clear and bright. The tree was a wild tea plant, what we now call Camellia sinensis. And in that single accidental sip, according to the legend, tea was born. Now, was there really an emperor named Shen Nong who discovered tea this way? Probably not, at least not exactly like that. Some scholars think Shen Nong was not one man at all, but a memory of a whole group of clever early farmers turned into a single hero over the centuries. But here's what we do know, beyond any legend. Tea is ancient. Archaeologists have found evidence that people in China were growing and using tea more than 4,000 years ago. To put that in perspective, that is over 1,000 years before the Great Pyramids of Egypt were finished. While much of the world was still very young, the Chinese were already drinking tea. But here is something that might surprise you. In those early days, tea was not really a drink at all. People did not sit back and sip it for pleasure. They treated it as medicine. They believed it could heal the body and clear poison from the blood. Some people did not drink it, they ate it. They chewed the bitter leaves raw or boiled them into a thick green porridge with grain like a vegetable soup. Imagine that. The elegant drink we know today began its life as a kind of food, a medicine, a bitter green paste. It would take more than 1,000 years for tea to become the graceful drink we recognize now. That great change came during a golden age, the Tang Dynasty, which ruled China more than 1,000 years ago. This was a time of poetry, art, music, and beauty. And during these years, tea finally transformed. It stopped being only medicine and became a pleasure, a daily joy, an art form. People across China, rich and poor, began drinking tea simply because they loved it. Tea houses opened in the towns. Friends gathered to talk over warm cups. The whole nation fell in love with the leaf. And in this golden age, one man did something that had never been done before. His name was Lu Yu. He was a scholar and a poet, and he loved tea more than almost anything in the world. So he sat down and wrote a book about it. He called it The Classic of Tea. It was the first book ever written entirely about tea anywhere on Earth. In it, he wrote about everything. How to grow the plant. How to pick the leaves, what water to use. How to boil it just right. How to serve it with grace and respect. To Lu Yu, tea was not just a drink. It was a path to a calmer, more thoughtful life. With this one book, he lifted tea up. He turned a simple habit into a refined art. And people have honored his name ever since. And in China, tea kept changing and growing for centuries more. The way people made it shifted from one age to the next. In some periods, they ground the leaves into a fine powder and whisked it into a froth. In later times, they moved toward the method we know best today, simply steeping whole leaves in hot water and pouring out the golden liquid. Tea houses spread to every town and city. Tea became woven into poetry, into painting, into the rhythm of daily life. Offering a cup of tea became a way to show respect, to welcome a guest, to make peace, to say without words, "You are welcome here." For thousands of years, while much of the world had never even heard of it, tea sat at the very center of Chinese life. It was, as an old Chinese saying goes, one of the basic necessities of every single day, as essential as rice and salt. And for all that time, China kept its treasure close. The plant grew in Chinese soil. The methods lived in Chinese hands. The rest of the world simply did not know. This was not really a secret kept on purpose, not at first. It was just distance. China was far away, separated from Europe by vast deserts and endless seas, by mountains and dangers that few travelers ever crossed. So while tea was already ancient and beloved in the East, it remained completely unknown in the West. Whole civilizations rose and fell in Europe without a single person ever tasting a cup. That long silence was about to end. Now our little leaf was ready to travel. And the first great journey it took was across the sea to Japan. It was Buddhist monks who carried it there. Centuries ago, Japanese monks traveled to China to study their religion. And while they were there, they discovered tea. They found that it did something useful for them. During long hours of meditation, when the body grew tired and the eyes grew heavy, a cup of tea kept the mind awake and alert. So the monks carried tea seeds home with them across the water back to Japan. And there, in the quiet of the temples, tea found a new and deeper meaning. In Japan, tea became something close to sacred. Over time, the Japanese created a ceremony around it, a slow and beautiful ritual known as chanoyu. This was not about drinking quickly to wake up. It was the opposite. Every movement was practiced and graceful. The way you folded the cloth, the way you held the bowl, the way you turned it gently in your hands before drinking, the sound of the water, the silence in the room. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was wasted. The whole ceremony was a lesson in being fully present, in finding beauty in a single quiet moment. People spent years, even a lifetime, learning to do it well. To this day, the Japanese tea ceremony remains one of the most refined and peaceful traditions in the world. From a leaf that fell into a pot by accident, humans had built an art of stillness. And this is worth sitting with for a moment because it tells us something about people. We took a simple plant, something that grows quietly on a hillside, and we turned it into a path to peace. We built whole philosophies around it. We said that the way a person prepares tea reveals the state of their heart. We said that to make tea well, you must first quiet your mind. In a busy, noisy world, the tea ceremony became a small island of calm, a way of saying, slow down, be here, pay attention to this single moment and nothing else. There is real wisdom in that, the kind of wisdom that does not age. Long before anyone spoke of stress or burnout, people understood that the simple act of making and sharing a warm drink could heal something inside us. That gentle truth is still waiting in every cup you make, if you slow down enough to feel it. But while tea was beloved across Asia for centuries, the rest of the world had no idea it existed. Europe knew nothing of it. For a very long time, this treasure belonged to the East alone. That was about to change. It was in the 16th and 17th centuries that European traders, sailing far from home in search of riches, first encountered this strange and fragrant drink. They tasted it. They were curious, and slowly they began carrying small amounts of it back to Europe on their long sea voyages. At first, tea was rare and shockingly expensive. Only the very richest people could afford it. It was a luxury, a curiosity, a sign of wealth. Most ordinary Europeans had never even seen it. Tea reached England a little later than some other parts of Europe, but when it arrived, something remarkable happened. The English did not just like tea. They fell completely, hopelessly in love with it. No other nation would embrace it quite the way Britain did. In time, tea would become so deeply woven into British life that it would feel as if it had always been there. But it had not. It was a foreign treasure, carried from the other side of the world, and the British could not get enough of it. At first, as in the rest of Europe, tea in Britain was a drink for the wealthy. It was costly and it was fashionable. It was served in fine homes, in delicate cups, as a mark of status. And then, in the early 1800s, a small social custom was born that would last for centuries. There was a duchess named Anna, the Duchess of Bedford. The story goes that she often felt hungry and low on energy in the long afternoon hours, in that empty stretch between lunch and a late dinner. So she began asking for a pot of tea and a little food to be brought to her room in the afternoon. Some bread, some cake, a few light things. She found it so pleasant that she began inviting her friends to join her. And just like that, afternoon tea was born. Soon it spread across fashionable society, and then beyond it, until tea in the afternoon became a beloved British ritual that endures even now. But here's where our gentle story begins to darken. Because as tea spread from the rich few to the many, as it became something nearly every person in Britain wanted every single day, the demand for it grew enormous. And that hunger, that vast national thirst, would soon create a problem so large that it would end in smuggling, addiction, and war. But before we follow tea into that darkness, let us cross another ocean because tea was about to help start a different revolution entirely. Far across the Atlantic, in the American colonies that Britain ruled, the people also loved their tea. And Britain, always looking for money, decided to tax that tea. The colonists were furious. It was not only the cost, it was the principle. They had no voice in the British Parliament, no say in the matter, and yet they were being taxed anyway. They had a phrase for their anger: no taxation without representation. If we cannot vote on it, they said, you cannot tax us for it. The anger came to a head on a cold December night in 1773. A group of colonists in the city of Boston decided they had taken enough. Some of them disguised themselves, dressing as Native American warriors to hide their faces. Under the cover of darkness, they crept down to the harbor, where 3 British ships sat loaded with chests of tea. They boarded the ships quietly. And then, working for hours, they pried open the chests, more than 300 of them, and dumped every last leaf into the cold water of the harbor. A fortune in tea floating away on the tide. We remember that night today by a famous name: the Boston Tea Party. It was not really a party at all. It was an act of defiance, a message hurled across an ocean. And the British answer was harsh. They punished Boston. They closed its port. They tightened their grip. But this only made the colonists angrier. The tension rose and rose until it finally broke into open war. That war became the American Revolution, and at the end of it, a brand new nation was born, the United States of America. So think of it for a moment. On one side of the world, tea would help drag China into a century of suffering. On the other side of the world, tea helped give birth to a whole new country. The same quiet leaf, shaping the fate of nations on opposite ends of the earth. Now let me bring you back to Britain, and to the problem of that endless thirst. Let me explain the problem because it is the heart of our story. By the late 1700s, Britain was buying staggering amounts of tea from China. We are talking about thousands and thousands of tons every single year. The whole country was drinking it. Rich and poor, morning and afternoon, Tea had become a part of daily life, and the British government noticed something. If everyone was buying tea, then tea could be taxed. So they placed a heavy tax on it, and tea became a river of money flowing into the government's pockets. The nation needed its tea, and the nation paid dearly for it. But there was a deep problem hidden inside all of this. And the problem was simple. China had something Britain desperately wanted. But Britain had almost nothing that China wanted in return. Think about what that means. The British wanted tea and silk and beautiful porcelain. They wanted these Chinese goods more and more every year. But when British traders offered their own products to China, the Chinese were not interested. China was a vast and powerful empire, rich and largely self-sufficient. It made what it needed. It did not crave British wool or British machines. There was only one thing China would happily accept in exchange for its precious tea: silver. Hard, shining silver. So this is what happened year after year. British ships sailed all the way to China loaded with silver. They handed over the silver, and they filled their ships with tea, and they sailed home. And every year, more and more silver flowed out of Britain and into China, and it did not come back. The British were slowly draining their own treasure. Their silver reserves were shrinking. The trade was deeply out of balance, tilted entirely in China's favor. And the British, watching their silver disappear into the East, grew anxious and frustrated. They needed a way to fix this. They needed to find something, anything, that the Chinese people would want as much as the British wanted tea. And eventually, to their shame, they found it. They found something that would balance the trade, but it was a poison. It was a drug. It was opium. Opium is a powerful and dangerous drug made from a certain flower, the poppy. It is highly addictive. Once a person begins using it, the body cries out for more and more until the person is trapped, unable to stop. The British controlled vast lands in India, and in India, they could grow opium cheaply in great quantities. And so a dark and clever plan took shape. The British would grow opium in India, carry it to China, and sell it to the Chinese people. The Chinese would pay in silver, and then the British would use that very same silver to buy their tea. The silver would flow out and then flow right back. The problem would be solved. But it would be solved by feeding a drug to millions of people. There was one obstacle. Opium was illegal in China. The Chinese emperors knew the danger of this drug, and they had banned it again and again by law. But laws are only as strong as the will to enforce them, and there was too much money to be made. So the British did not stop. They simply went around the law. The East India Company, the powerful British trading company, did not carry the opium openly itself. Instead, it sold the opium to private traders, who carried it to the coast of China and handed it to Chinese smugglers. These smugglers, in their fast little boats, slipped the drug quietly into the country and spread it through the population. It was a vast, illegal, hidden trade, and it grew with terrifying speed. And the numbers tell a frightening story. In the early 1800s, the amount of opium being smuggled into China grew year after year. In just under 30 years, the opium pouring into China increased nearly 10 times over. Tens of thousands of chests of the drug were arriving, each one full of misery. And as the opium flooded in, addiction spread like a sickness through Chinese society. In some areas along the coast, it is said that the great majority of people had fallen under its spell. Workers, soldiers, officials, ordinary families. The drug did not care who it caught. And now the silver that had flowed into China for so long began to reverse. It started flowing out of China into British hands, just as the British had planned. The trade was balanced again. But the cost was a nation being slowly poisoned. Let me pause our story for a moment to show you something lighter, but just as remarkable, about how badly the world wanted this leaf. Because tea did not just cause wars and smuggling, it also sparked one of the most thrilling races the seas have ever seen. In those days, fresh tea was prized. The faster a ship could carry a new harvest of tea from China all the way to London, the more money that tea would fetch. The first ship home with the new season's tea won the highest prices and the greatest glory. And so shipbuilders began to design a new kind of vessel, long and sleek and impossibly fast, with towering sails that caught every breath of wind. These beautiful ships were called tea clippers, and they raced. Picture it. Several of these graceful ships, loaded with tea, leaving China on roughly the same day. Ahead of them lay a journey of many thousands of miles around the bottom of the world, through storms and calm and danger all the way to England. And it became a contest. The captains pushed their crews and their ships to the very limit day and night, week after week, desperate to be first. People back in London followed the great races with excitement, placing bets, waiting at the docks. In one famous race, ships that had set off from China on the far side of the planet arrived in London after months at sea, separated by only minutes. Minutes after a voyage of half the globe. All of it for the love of a leaf in a cup. That is how much the world wanted tea. And there's one more thing I want you to understand about how deeply tea had sunk into ordinary life. Remember that heavy tax the British government placed on tea? It made tea expensive, and whenever something people crave becomes expensive by law, something else always appears in the shadows. Smuggling. All along the British coast, smugglers brought in tea secretly, avoiding the tax, selling it cheaply to ordinary people who could not otherwise afford their daily cup. It became a vast hidden trade of its own. Honest shopkeepers struggled to compete with the smugglers' cheap leaves. Some sellers even cheated, mixing real tea with dried leaves from other plants, or with leaves that had already been used once and dried again just to stretch their supply. The hunger for tea was so great that it created crime, trickery, and a whole secret economy in its shadow. From the emperor's garden to the smuggler's midnight boat, this single leaf had wrapped itself around the lives of millions. So you see, tea was never just a drink. It was money. It was power. It was crime and art and politics and war, all swirling together in one warm cup. And slowly, over time, tea reached everyone. What had once been a luxury for kings and the very rich became the daily comfort of the poorest worker. In the cold, hard years when factories filled the cities, a hot cup of sweet tea was sometimes the one small warmth in a long and bitter day. People stirred sugar into it, another product carried across the world by ships and, sadly, by the labor of enslaved people, and the two together, tea and sugar, became a cheap source of energy and comfort for the working poor. A tired body, a cold morning, little money, and yet a warm, sweet cup to keep going. Tea had traveled all the way from an emperor's garden to the rough wooden table of a factory worker. It belonged to everyone now. And that, in its own way, is its own kind of marvel. Now the Chinese emperor faced a terrible situation. His people were being destroyed by a drug they had never asked for. His country's silver was draining away. Something had to be done, and done with force. So the emperor chose a man he trusted, a strong and honest official named Lin Zexu, and he gave him a hard task. Stop the opium, end it. Whatever it takes. Lin Zexu was not a man to do things halfway. He arrived in the great trading port and he moved with iron determination. He demanded that the foreign traders hand over their opium, all of it. And when he had gathered it, he did something dramatic, something meant to show the world that China was serious. He took more than 20,000 chests of British opium, an enormous fortune in drugs, and he destroyed it. He had it mixed with lime and salt and water and washed away into the sea. He refused to pay the British a single coin for what he had destroyed. To Lin Zexu, this was justice. He was defending his people from poison. But to the British traders and the British government, this was an outrage. Their property, they claimed, had been seized and destroyed. And they wanted payment. They wanted revenge. And they had something China did not. They had the most powerful navy in the world. And so it came to war. The conflict that broke out is now known as the First Opium War. Think about that name for a moment. A war over opium. A war that began, if you trace it all the way back, with a simple cup of tea. Because Britain wanted tea, it lost its silver. To win back its silver, it sold opium. To protect the opium trade, it went to war. The gentle leaf and the cruel drug were two ends of the very same chain. The war was not a fair fight. China was vast and ancient, but its military was old, and it was not ready for the modern warships and guns of the British Navy. The British struck along the coast, taking city after city. China fought, but it could not match the force brought against it. And in the end, China lost. It was a bitter, humiliating defeat for a proud and ancient empire. The price of losing was heavy. China was forced to sign a harsh agreement. It had to open several of its ports to foreign trade, ending its careful control over who could come and go. It had to pay an enormous sum of money to Britain, and it had to hand over a piece of its own land, an island, to British control. That island was Hong Kong, and it would remain in British hands for over 150 years. There would even be a second war, some years later, that weakened China further still. Historians in China would later look back on this time as the beginning of what they called a century of humiliation. A long, painful period in which their once mighty country was pushed around by foreign powers, its weakness exposed to the world. And it had begun, in large part, with the trade in tea and the poison used to pay for it. But the British were not finished with tea. Even after the wars, a problem remained. China still held the greatest secret of all. China still knew how to grow tea and how to make it, and the rest of the world did not. For all their warships and victories, the British still had to come to China for every leaf they drank. They wanted to break that hold. They wanted to grow tea themselves, in their own lands. But how do you make something when only your rival knows the recipe? The answer was simple, and it was shameless. If you cannot buy the secret, and you cannot grow it yourself, then you steal it. And so we come to one of the strangest and boldest stories in all of history. The British East India Company hired a Scottish botanist, a quiet expert in plants named Robert Fortune. His mission was extraordinary. He was to travel deep into the forbidden interior of China, into the hidden hills where the finest tea was grown, places where foreigners were simply not allowed to go. And there, he was to steal it all, the plants. The seeds, the secret methods, everything. To do this, Robert Fortune did something remarkable. He disguised himself as a Chinese man. He shaved his head in the local style. He dressed in local clothing. He even hired a servant to help him pass as a traveler from a distant part of China to explain his strange accent and unfamiliar ways. And in this disguise, heart surely pounding, he walked straight into the tea country that no foreigner was meant to see. He visited the great tea gardens and factories. He watched carefully how the leaves were picked and dried and prepared, learning the secrets that China had guarded for thousands of years. And he gathered the plants. Thousands upon thousands of tea plants and seeds, smuggled out and kept alive in special sealed glass cases for the long journey. Then he carried his stolen treasure to the slopes of India, land the British controlled, and there the seeds were planted. It worked. Tea began to grow in India, in places whose names you may know today, like Darjeeling and Assam. And within his own lifetime, something stunning happened. India passed China to become one of the greatest tea growers in the entire world. China had held the secret for 5,000 years, and it was carried away by one man in disguise. To this day, many call it the greatest act of corporate theft in history. The whole shape of the modern tea trade, the tea grown in India and beyond, traces back to that quiet botanist and his bold disguise. The next time someone offers you a cup of Indian tea, remember that it began with a Scotsman in disguise, slipping through forbidden hills with a secret he was never meant to carry away. There is even a small ghost of this story hidden in language itself. Have you ever noticed that some countries call it tea and others call it cha or chai? It is the same leaf, but two different names, and they traveled by two different roads. Where tea moved over land, carried by traders along the old routes, it kept a name close to cha. Where it traveled by sea in the ships of certain traders, it became tea. So the very word in your mouth, every time you say it, carries a tiny clue about how this leaf reached your part of the world. Language remembers the journey, even when we forget. So let us return now to where we started, to that quiet cup of tea with the steam rising gently into the air. It looks so innocent, does it not? So calm, so simple. And yet, hidden inside its history is one of the most dramatic stories humans have ever lived. A leaf that fell into an emperor's pot by accident. A medicine that became an art. A treasure carried across the world. A national thirst so deep it drained a country's silver. A poison sold to balance the books. And a war that reshaped the fate of nations. This is the thing about history that I find so wonderful, and I hope you feel it too. The biggest events in the world are often hiding inside the smallest, most ordinary things. A leaf. A cup. A simple drink shared between friends. We move through our days surrounded by objects whose stories we never think to ask about. The coffee in your mug. The spices in your kitchen. The cotton in your shirt. The sugar in your bowl. Each of them has traveled across time and oceans. Each one has its own tale of discovery and struggle, of beauty and sometimes of darkness. The world is far richer and stranger than it first appears, if only we take the time to look closely. Think about it. The chair you are sitting on grew as a tree somewhere, was cut and shaped by hands you will never know. The glass in your window was once sand, melted by fire. The clothes on your back may have traveled through 5 countries before they reached you. We are surrounded every single day by quiet objects that have crossed time and oceans and human lives to arrive in front of us. We just stopped seeing them. We stopped wondering. As children, we asked why about everything endlessly until the adults grew tired. And then somewhere along the way, most of us stopped asking. The world became ordinary. But it was never ordinary. It was always astonishing. We simply forgot to look, and maybe that is the real lesson hidden in the bottom of the cup. Curiosity, the willingness to look at something ordinary and ask, where did you come from? How did you get here? What did you cost, and who paid the price? Emperor Shen Nong, in the legend, did not throw away that strange brown water. He was curious. He looked closer. He took a sip. And that small act of curiosity, the story says, gave the world tea. Your curiosity can do the same in your own life. The habit of looking deeper, of asking better questions, of seeing the hidden story in the everyday, that is a kind of quiet power. It makes your whole world larger and more interesting. So keep asking. Keep wondering. Keep looking closely at the small things, the way you might learn a new language, one curious word at a time. There is a whole universe of stories waiting in the most ordinary places if you only choose to see them. And think of how the story of tea rewards that kind of attention. A tired emperor could have poured out that strange brown water and thought nothing of it. A monk could have left the seeds behind. A poet could have kept his love of tea to himself instead of writing it down for the ages. But they each paid attention. They each followed their curiosity one step further than most people would. And because they did, the world is different. That is the quiet truth at the heart of this. The biggest changes in history often began with one person noticing one small thing and caring enough to look closer. You will never know which small thing in your own life is the beginning of something larger. So treat them all with a little wonder. The cup in your hand. The word you just learned. The ordinary morning in front of you. Any of them could be a door, so the next time you hold a warm cup of tea, take a slow breath and remember. You are holding 5,000 years of human history. The misty mountains of ancient China. The silent temples of Japan. The fine drawing rooms of England. The dark smuggling ships. The roar of cannons. All of it resting quietly in your hands. Drink it slowly. And be amazed at how big a story can fit inside one small cup. If this video helped you, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and keep growing every day.